The council chamber was full of noise, shouted accusations, grinding mandibles, holographic system pings. Eric's heard none of it. His mantis-like auditory receptors had forcefully prioritized. The only thing that made it through the panic was the heavy, rhythmic thud of his own pulse. Loud, slow, counting. What happens when an apex predator realizes it has been in the crosshairs for a millennium? Do you have the nerve to find out? The ancestral war trophies on the obsidian walls had still commanded reverence then, just 4 cycles ago, before the border scouts returned with the anomalous data drive. Before the drive, the Ferrith considered themselves the undisputed apex of the Orion Spur. They were the architects of the Blade Accord, a coalition built entirely on their own terrifying martial supremacy. Their towering mantis-like physiology and strict, unyielding military culture meant they absolutely never negotiated from a position of weakness. But then the border scouts had dragged a decaying, completely unmapped satellite out of the deep space border system, a piece of technology so ancient it barely registered on their scanners. It was dormant, running on a trickle of phantom power, yet perfectly, terrifyingly intact. And it was watching them. Worse, it had always been watching. The technicians managed to power the primary console. Eric's remembered the chilling green hue illuminating the scout's angular face. It was a weapons targeting display. The crosshairs were locked dead center on the Ferrith homeworld. The targeting data's last update timestamp was 1,000 Earth years ago. The system was still active, still tracking the planet's rotation. They debated war. The council elders clashed their blade arms in ceremonial displays of aggression, demanding a fleet deployment to the unknown coordinates embedded in the satellite's core. Then Earth sent a representative. Commander Elena Vasquez walked into the angular architecture of the Ferrith War Council chamber without a single guard. She wore the stark gray uniform of the Earth Long Watch Division. She did not bow. She did not display the customary throat-bearing gestures of a lesser species. She just stood there, calm. Eric's observed her from his elevated podium. He kept his deadly blade arms locked in a strict diplomatic fold. The physical effort required to maintain that composure made his joints tremble. His predatory instincts screamed that this soft, shellless biped was infinitely dangerous. The air inside the chamber tasted of ozone and aggression pheromones. Dozens of Ferrith warlords, their exoskeletons polished to a dark sheen, loomed over the central sunken floor. They were apex predators, born to dissect prey with surgical precision. Yet Vasquez did not sweat. She did not alter her respiratory rate. Her heartbeat, which Eric's could distinctly isolate with his specialized auditory canals, remained a slow, steady drumbeat of absolute confidence. "How did you monitor us?" demanded the weapons master, his voice a series of aggressive clicks. "Our border sensors detect every tachyon emission, every warp signature. Your primitive station emitted nothing." Vasquez clasped her hands behind her back. "We didn't use active sensors. There were no signals for you to detect." "Impossible. It's a basic coronagraph principle," Vasquez explained, her voice steady enough to cut glass and carrying easily over the grinding mandibles of the elders. "You don't look for the object itself. You look at the brilliant star behind it. Stellar coronagraphs can detect objects simply by measuring the exact amount of starlight they block. When your massive war barges move across the border, they silhouette against the local suns. We didn't ping your hulls. We just watched your shadows passing across the light. We explore the terrifying patience of humanity every week. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next revelation." The sheer, suffocating scale of the paranoia temporarily paralyzed the entire room. 1,000 years of violent Ferrith history, of deeply secret fleet movements, covert orbital strikes, and bloody planetary blockades, had been casually recorded by a soft-skinned species they hadn't even known existed. They had fought and bled under the delusion of total supremacy, completely unaware that human eyes had been tracking every single drop of spilled blood from the dart. "And how many of these silent sentinels have you placed in our territory?" the weapons master hissed, stepping closer to the human. Vasquez met the towering alien's gaze. I can confirm the exact number of stations currently operating within Ferrith-designated space. She named a number. It was high enough to make Irix's spiracles flare in shock. And the total? The weapons master pressed, his blade arms twitching. Across all sectors? Vasquez paused, a cold, deliberate beat of silence. That number is classified. A razor-thin smile touched her lips. For your comfort, the elders slammed their fists against the polished obsidian podiums. Microfractures spider-webbed across the ancient stone under the force of their fury. The translator matrices struggled to parse the overlapping clicks and hisses of pure, unfiltered outrage. The weapons master paced the sunken floor of the chamber, his heavy footfalls echoing like artillery fire. He listed the armaments of the border fleet. He detailed the orbital bombardment capabilities of their vanguard. He spent a considerable amount of time outlining exactly how the Ferrith would systematically dismantle every Earth vessel that dared enter their space to retrieve the dormant technology. Vasquez let the threat hang in the suffocating air. She did not interrupt. She simply waited for the echoes of their collective fury to bounce off the ancestral trophies and die out completely. You misunderstand the nature of our arrangement, she said finally, adjusting the cuff of her gray uniform with agonizing slowness. Irix felt the chitin along his thorax tighten. He recognized the tone perfectly. It was the absolute calm of a predator that had already won the encounter before the prey even realized the hunt had begun. We were here before your sensors activated. Think about what that means. Before the weapons master could formulate a response to the quiet threat, the heavy stone doors of the chamber ground open. A junior tactician stumbled in. He bypassed the strict formal protocols entirely, rushing directly to the central holographic projector and slamming a data slate into the primary receptor. The projection flared. It was not just the single station locked on the homeworld. The map populated with a sea of aggressive crimson markers. 400 identical monitoring platforms materialized in the hologram. They were parked in the silent shadow of every major Ferrith military installation, every orbital shipyard, every deep space colony, every planetary defense grid, all targeted, all holding firing solutions perfectly calculated 1,000 years ago. None of them had ever fired. That was the exact moment the chamber dissolved into the absolute chaos of shouts and threats. Irix heard none of it. His auditory systems had isolated that slow, heavy pulse. It was the sound of his own biology realizing the devastating depth of their vulnerability. The Ferrith had built a sprawling empire on the belief that strength was meant to be wielded violently and immediately. Yet this soft, shell-less species had held a blade to the throat of the entire blade accord for a millennium and simply chose not to cut. His physical discipline completely shattered. For the first time in thousands of generations, the deep ancestral programming of his species overrode his conscious control. His massive blade arms unfolded involuntarily, the serrated edges locked into a wide, desperate defensive posture designed to ward off a vastly superior predator. He stood frozen at his podium. Commander Vasquez looked up at him. She did not take a single step back. The chaotic noise of the Warlord slowly drained from the room as they noticed Irix's defensive stance. One by one, they fell silent, their gaze tracking from the Blade General back to the center of the room. Above the human's head, the projection continued to slowly rotate. 400 crosshairs, glowing a pale and steady green, rested perfectly still over the heart of their empire. What would you do if your entire history was just a mercy granted by a stranger in the dark? We'll be right here tomorrow with another story from the Edge.